All right, well, it's 3 o'clock. I think we can get started. My name is Steve Persh. I'm a senior engineer and team lead at Palantir.net, and this presentation is automated testing for migrations. We'll be looking at Drupal's Migrate module and Drupal's built-in Simpletest framework. And then we're going to talk about how to use them together. So can I get a show of hands who here has used Migrate module in any capacity? Who has written a migration class? Okay. Yes, sure. So this is great. We'll be walking through some of the basics of Migrate module. So if you have no familiarity with it, no problem at all. We'll be starting with an introduction of Migrate module. So Simpletest. Who's run a Simpletest? One of the tests built into Drupal. Who has written a Simpletest? Okay, great. Because again, we'll be doing an introduction to Simpletest. Who has attempted to test a migration? All right. Anybody attempt to test a migration with Simpletest? All right. That's the subject of the presentation. Sure.
A union of this subset and that subset and third.
Exactly. Well, we'll run a query and see who has tried to do this. So to give you a sense of where we're going, I'm going to first jump to the end and show Simpletest running a single migration test, just to give you a sense of where this presentation is going. So this is Drupal's testing framework built into Drupal core. It gives us all these tests that are written for Drupal core. This is a single test of the Migrate examples module, and I can run the test and right away find out that my test passed. So this probably doesn't mean much yet, but I just want to let you know this is what we're building up to. A migration has already run. After the migration has run, I can run a test and verify that what I expected to happen has happened.
This is simple test. It says 0 seconds.
That is part of the interesting union of these two modules. That this is running in 0 seconds, which is very unusual for Simpletest. So in part 3 of the presentation, we'll get to how that's even possible, because normally this number is a lot larger. And thank you for catching that, because it is an unusual part of this process. So first, let's talk about Migrate module. I like to think of Migrate module as the module that made Drupal love object-oriented programming. Not everyone would agree with that statement, but as far as OOP in the Drupal community, Migrate is a pretty good example of how object-oriented programming can simplify a lot of our tasks. The base classes that come with Migrate module are pretty good for what they do, and they mean that when I need to write a migration for client work, so much of the work is already done for me, and extending is fairly simple. So let's start with a demo of how Migrate module works. For Migrate, I'll be demoing through Drush, Drupal's command line utility. For Simpletest, I'll be demoing in the browser. With both of those frameworks, you can either work on the command line with Drush, you can work through the browser. I'll be showing one of each just to show you can do it either way. It's largely a question of personal preference. So the first thing I'm going to do is look at the migrations that are available through the Migrate example module. It comes with Migrate module. When you download it, you get this nice features-based module that will do a couple example migrations for you. So I'm going to run the drush command. Can everybody see this? This needs to be bigger. Drush ms will give me migrate status. Oh, and I'm in my presentations directory. Here we are over in my Drupal directory. If I run drush ms migrate status, I now see the status of all the migrations that are available on this site. And these are just the migrations that come with this example module. There's a group of migrations that are all around beer, and there's a group of migrations that are all around wine. This is just what comes with the module. Go ahead, question. I think I can do this. I'm on 6.3.dev. I just got a new machine at work and I started setting it up so that I could alias to different versions because I can't fully explain it, but I know some versions of Drush are more compatible with Drupal 8 than others. Don't quote me on any of that, I just know that there are multiple versions of Drush, and there we go. You need Drush 7 if you're working with Drupal 8. Great. Okay, so these are the statuses of my migrations. And if any questions come up, feel free to raise your hand, interrupt, and I'll do my best to answer as we go. So for the purposes of this demo, we're only going to be looking at the beer migrations. Oh, I need to actually specify a drush command. So this is drush migrate status, and I'm filtering by a group. The group is called default, and I can see the status of the beer term migration, the beer user migration, the beer node migration, the beer comment migration. And I can see that this beer term migration has had 3 items in total, and they're all imported. If I wanted to roll those migrations back, I could do drush mr for migration rollback, beer term, and it's rolled back. So I really prefer drush for working with migrations because I find it just a lot faster to do rollbacks, to do imports on the command line. But like I said, there is a user interface in the browser that you can use as well and do just about all the same things. So I just rolled back and then re-imported a bunch of terms. Well, what did that actually get me? It got me some taxonomy terms in one of these tabs.
What are you migrating?
So, good question. So I'm migrating from a CSV into taxonomy terms. So wait, no, I'm sorry, it's not a CSV. In the migrate example module, migrate example installs some custom MySQL tables, and that I think might be in my next slide or 2 slides forward. So this is what the source data looks like. I'll just skip ahead to it. So in the source for this example migration, we've got a custom MySQL table that this module installed. It's got a column for the style of beer, a small details column, a parent for a hierarchical relationship, and then a region of the world that is associated with this type of beer. So for an example module, this is just a super simple vocabulary for categorizing types of beer. And what it gets me inside of Drupal is a small vocabulary with just 3 terms.
Would you use this for a one-time import, or is that continuous?
So you can use Migrate for a one-time import. You can also use it for continuous migration. One of the best parts about Migrate module is that it does a pretty good job of tracking what's already been imported. So you have the option of overwriting if you want. Anything that's already been imported, overwrite it with any updates. You can also import IDs 1 through 10, and then the next day your source data has 11, 12, 13. Those next ones can get imported as well. Okay, so from a very high level with Migrate module, we have a data source, which is this custom SQL table. In this example, it's a table that happens to be in our same database. In practice, it probably would be some database somewhere else, maybe a CSV file, maybe an XML file, maybe flat HTML. But as far as Migrate module is concerned, you've got a data source somewhere, and you have a class that reads in that data source and does so in a way that you can take a single record at a time from that data source and then save it to a Drupal entity. So in this example, we've got 3 taxonomy terms that describe types of beer. We can go through each one at a time and then save them to Drupal taxonomy terms. And in addition to the name, we get that parent relationship that we saw over in the source data, and we also get that description. So the big pieces of writing a migration, you need to query that source data. So in this beer example, we've got a class called beer term migration. It's extending another migration class, and we're querying for that data. For the purposes of this presentation, you don't need to follow every single line of code that you're seeing here. The big picture is that when you're migrating, you need to tell your class, what is my data, where is it, and a very common way to do so is just with a database select. Select all these rows from this database. This is your data. These are the fields that you need. Another big piece is telling Migrate what is the unique, well, ideally unique key that's important in this data source. Because, like I said in that example, if you have IDs 1 through 10 in your source data, and then tomorrow you're going to have 11, 12, 13, Migrate module will track what source key corresponds to which imported Drupal ID. So in this example that we're looking at, our source key is this style, ale, Pilsner, red ale, and those are corresponding to Drupal taxonomy term IDs. So in this case, 6. So that's a detail that Migrate module has to track. What's our source data? What's its important key? And then where is it going? So in this example, we're going to taxonomy terms. So we're telling, again, in our constructor function, there's a destination, and the destination is a taxonomy term, and its vocabulary is Migrate example beer styles. Oh. And then there's field mapping. So telling Migrate module, we have these columns in the source data, they line up to these Drupal properties. So in the case of this example, we can see that the parent name in Drupal lines up with the style parent database column. And for documentation purposes, you can add a description. So this is me simplifying the code that's in this example module. If you want more details, I recommend checking out Migrate module. It contains the example, and where were we? We were at beer term. So this is the beer term migration class. Here's that database select. Here's where we set up the destination. Fields get mapped. The taxonomy term name lines up with that style column. The description in Drupal lines up with the details column. So we're telling Migrate where this data is going. So you've seen me run a couple of Drush commands. I just wanted to make sure that I hit on a couple others, because running migrations through Drush I found to just be a very satisfying and efficient way to work. So you saw migrate status. That's the one that tells me what are all my migrations, how many items do they have, what's been imported, what's not imported yet, and what was the last time that it ran. We saw migrate import and migrate rollback to import and roll back that beer term migration. Migrate field source is an extremely helpful one for debugging and developing when you're concerned about what fields do I have available. So drush mfs is the alias for migrate field source. What are the fields that are available in my source data? And it's those same fields that we just saw in this database table. We've got style, details, parent, region, hoppiness. Is that? Oh, there it is. Hoppiness. And you can do the same thing for destination to see what's available on the Drupal side. Where can this data go? You can import to the taxonomy term ID, the name, description, parent name, format, weight, path. These are basically all of your Drupal entity properties and your fields. So when writing migrations, it's helpful to see in a summary what's available in my source, what's available in Drupal.
And what's nice is if you run it migrate once and you try to run it again, it doesn't.
Say that again?
If you run migrate again, it doesn't clobber over.
Exactly. So I just ran that import of the beer term migration. If I try to run this again, it will process 0 items because this has already been fully processed. If I wanted to overwrite, I could. If I wanted to specify a single ID to import again, even though it's already been imported, I think ale was one of those terms. I can do this ID list flag and say, regardless of whether or not it's been imported already, I want to import ale again, and then we process just that single item. The migrate mappings drush command lets us see. Oh, and again, I need to specify that I'm concerned about the beer term migration. It gives a summary of what's been mapped to what already. Migrate messages and migrate reset status. I found this one to be very helpful when running a large migration. I'll start an import of 10,000 items and then immediately realize that I forgot something or had a typo. But the migration is already running, and it just took me a month to figure out that I don't need to throw away the entire database at that point. You can do this migrate reset status command, and it will reset the status, and you can stop and then start again or roll back and re-import. So I hope me bringing up reset status saves somebody some time because it took me too long to find that one. And if you want to see the full available, the full list of available migration commands, you can just look through drush help and see these are all of them. And they each have their own set of, oh, and there's a spelling mistake. They each have their own set of drush options. So we saw that group flag for specifying that you only care about the default group. You can also use this when running migrations if you wanted to import or roll back just the default group or just that wine group. You can use the group flag, that ID list flag that we just saw can be used for importing or rolling back single IDs. And then two more commonly used flags, limit and feedback. Again, an example migration with only 3 items, you're probably not going to need to put a limit of 100 items or feedback of every 10 items, but if you're running a particularly large migration, it can be helpful to get feedback every however many items you want. When importing 10,000, 100,000, whatever, the limit and the feedback are just helpful ways of seeing what am I actually doing as I'm doing it, how fast is this. Any questions on Migrate before we jump over to Simpletest? Yeah.
So it operates in like a batch mode,
Mm-hmm.
and so like you have control over that, or you don't have to worry about that. And wouldn't you assume that it would report back on when it completed a batch out of the total number of items that it was migrating?
Yes, I know it even has a way of tracking when it's about to run out of memory and closing that process and starting another process. So you could start through Drush or through the browser an import of however many thousands of items, and it won't run out of memory. It'll process, to my understanding, I have not looked at the code for how this works, but what I've heard is that it processes up to the point where it would run out of memory, stops, and restarts without me having to pay any attention to it. It just seems to work. I've run migration processes that take many, many hours to complete, and it seems to just work. Right here. Yes, you in the hat.
Can you talk a little bit about dependencies? You have taxonomy terms that need to go through.
Good question. So in that beer group, I'm pretty sure there are some dependencies. So we've got an import of users and an import of nodes. I think if I try to run this import of nodes, it won't let me because the user migration is a dependency. The idea is that users create nodes. You should have your users imported before you import your nodes. So if I run the user, I can then run the node.
And the nice thing is now you can create a bash script that logic in it.
Yeah, I would.
If you run the group, doesn't it do it in dependency order?
I hope so. And I can't remember off the top of my head. But yeah, if nothing else, you could.
1,000 times over the last 2 weeks, but I can't remember right.
Yeah. If nothing else, you certainly could write a bash script to just hit each one in the order that you need to. Mm-hmm.
When you do an import, is the import entirely responsible for that item? Say, import some data from a database, but then add some extra information to that.
Mm-hmm.
Is that legit?
Yes. There's a method on these classes called prepare, where you get the source data object, and you can add to it whatever you want. So that's a common way of bringing in data that's not feasible to bring in at query time. You may, when looking at a single source record, may need to re-query for something more complex and do that at a record by record level. So you can do that in the prepare method.
I'm thinking like a system where you've got like a reseller.
Mm-hmm.
You get an inventory database of what's available for resale.
Mm-hmm.
You import that, create a bunch of items.
Yeah.
But the items didn't actually come with a full description.
Mm-hmm.
And now somebody's got to go put extra data with that.
That is an example that I think I'll cover when we get to the testing piece. So I think there's a good way of handling that. So because we're getting a little pressed for time, I'm going to move on to Simpletest. Also object-oriented, less loved than Migrate module, to say the least. So first let's do a demo of what Simpletest looks like. We saw earlier that quick demo of using Simpletest on migration data. Let's now run one of Core's many, many simple tests. So this is just testing the node edit process. It will not complete in 0 seconds. I think in earlier testing this was completing in something like 16 seconds, which is pretty fast for a simple test. Okay, 15 seconds. So in those 15 seconds we can see that Drupal created a role, created a user, and what it's building up to is going to the node add page and adding a node. So let's talk about why it takes 15 seconds to run this one test, or some tests 2 minutes, some tests 10 minutes. There still is the one Drupal code base that I have in this site. However, there are 2 sets of tables in the database that essentially add up to 2 different Drupals. We have the real Drupal site that we see here, and then as this process is running, Simpletest is creating an alternate set of database tables with a prefix against which it can send requests, hit the node page on this second fake Drupal, which gets the job done for behavioral testing. If we want to know in isolation, can we use the node add form? This is a way to do it. It's slow because we need to create all these database tables and tear them down, but it gets the job done. So let's look at how these classes work. Again, we've got a base class provided by Simpletest module. Just like Migrate module provides a bunch of base classes, Simpletest provides a good base class. We've got a getInfo method that tells us just the basic information that we saw over in the browser. This is the test for node editing. We create a node and test node edit functionality. There's a setup method that does some setup tasks. In this case, we need a user, and that user needs to be able to edit pages. And it's even setting up 2 users, one with more higher level permissions. It then uses this method of Drupal post to post data to that second testing only version of Drupal. So the main version of Drupal is sending HTTP requests to the fake Drupal and performing all of these user level tasks. And again, it takes a very long time to do, but this is the type of testing that we wanted. We wanted to be able to test, can users do what they need to do? So Simpletest does that job for us. And then it makes assertions. So the assertions are essentially the meat of these tests. We're going to the page, creating a node, and then asserting whether or not that node actually made it into the database. So we're calling assert true, does this node actually exist? And there are a bunch of assertions that you can do. You can do simple true-false assertions. Perhaps a better first one to think of is assert text. You've got a page like the node add form. You just added a new form element. That form element has some help text. You call assert text to check, is that text actually on this page? If it is, this test passes and you get green. If it's not there, it fails and you get false. Assert link by href. Is there somewhere on the page a link that has this URL in its href? is there a field somewhere on the page that has this ID? You can do XPath checking. You can assert that some HTML is not on the page. For just about every type of assertion, you have it not equivalent. Assert that this value is not null. Any questions so far on the basic idea of simple tests? Great. All right. Simple test and migrate together. So we're working today off of this sandbox that I came to a couple weeks into writing a migration last summer when I was getting frustrated. I kept having regressions, and I thought, this is what testing is for. Testing is supposed to help me stop regressions. I would write handling for this external MP3 file, and then I would accidentally break it. And I thought, there's got to be something. So I Googled around, and I found a sandbox done by a developer over in England, Edward Crompton. He just gave me this week access to this sandbox, so I hope to be contributing and committing patches to this. So let's get into how this sandbox module combines migrate and Simpletest. So we saw that demo earlier of running a simple test in 0 seconds. And you heard me say before, Simpletest creates these alternate database tables. It's not supposed to be able to do that in 0 seconds. Well, there's one code base and there's one database in this example. The big idea of this sandbox is to override the setup methods and the teardown methods in Simpletest, the methods that create and tear down that alternate database. So by its very nature, this approach to testing is a hack of the basic idea of Simpletest, which is to create an alternate safe database and do testing there. The basic idea here, don't create an alternate database. Do these tests against the real database. And by doing tests against the real database, you can ask for what's the Drupal taxonomy term that actually got created when I meant to import the term Pilsner. Get that term ID, and then is the description of that term refreshing? Because when I wrote this migration, I saw in my source data that the description of Pilsner was refreshing. When I wrote the field, well, I'm speaking as if I wrote this example module. I didn't write this example module. But let's pretend that I wrote the example module. I would be manually checking, is this data getting in here? By writing a test, we can constantly re-verify that this field mapping continues to hold. So let's make this test fail. So over in the beer migration class, we have a field mapping that takes that details field in the source and puts it in the description. If I comment out this line, that data won't get migrated. So just to see what we're looking at in Drupal, we've got the Pilsner taxonomy term. Oh, I've rolled back this too many times. So it has the description refreshing. If I roll back this migration, oh, I first need to roll back the node migration because of those dependencies. So rolling back the migration, that term is no longer there. There are no terms in this vocabulary. If I run the import, these come back. But now, with no description, because it's commented out. So that test is now going to fail. The taxonomy term is there, but the expected description is not. If I put the line back, roll back again, import again, it passes. That's the idea.
So you can't run Simpletest from the command line?
You can run Simpletest from the command line. I'm just doing Migrate and command line and Simpletest in the browser just to show that both are optional. But let's see. Test run would be what you would do. So this is a dangerous way of writing tests because we're writing tests that are going to run on the real database. That means that these tests should only be reading things. They shouldn't be writing, and they shouldn't be deleting anything, which is normally something that you would do in a test. You would write a test to make sure that you can delete nodes. You would write a test to make sure that you can update nodes. These tests should only be for reading data that you expect to be there after you run a migration. Another difference is tests commonly do all the setup for you. At least in the way I'm using the Sandbox module, the test doesn't run the migration for me. I run the migration, and then I run the test. You probably could structure the test to call the migrate code for you. I don't have a particularly strong opinion about if it should be done that way. If you're very concerned about the dangerousness of running tests against the real database, I think there is a separate module out there to let you clone your current database into that Simpletest fake database structure and run your tests there. So that would be a safer way to do it.
Yeah, I mean, backing up your database, running your full suite of tests, and then even just restoring your database is faster than having to go through the whole.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So, so again, I mentioned some of these already. I came to this approach in order to catch regressions in a complex migration I was running. Since then, I found that it gets me into that test-driven development mentality, which is getting talked about a lot in the Drupal community. If I write the tests before writing those field mappings, then it puts me in the mentality of doing only what I need to do. If I know I care about making sure that the description field is migrated, I'll write the test first, I'll see it fail, and then when it passes, I know I'm done. It can be a de facto to-do list. I could write a bunch of tests first, see them all fail, and then one by one get them green, and then when they're all green, I know I'm done. And it can also be used to understand complex exception handling. So in that client project I was talking about before, I had essentially news articles that had attached MP3s. For every news article, there was the canonical MP3, and then there was a backup MP3. But I found in the 40,000 or so records, sometimes the canonical MP3 was a 404. If I tried to download it, it just wasn't there. Sometimes the backup MP3 was just empty. There was no record in the database. Sometimes they were both 404s. And I really couldn't even keep track of what all the permutations were. So one by one, I would just write a test for, here's a record that I know actually has MP3s in both places. Here's a record that I know has a 404. So in that prepare row method that I was mentioning earlier, I could take the source data, do some kind of detection on it. This is not real code. This is an example. Do some kind of check. Does this source record have this problematic data? If so, give it a migration tag. And really, this is just a way of saying, put a taxonomy term on this node when it gets imported. I found this to be a really helpful way of identifying items that have some kind of problem that will require manual review later. You can, in this prepare row step, put on as many taxonomy terms as you want that'll then show up on your nodes, and then the content administrators can say, okay, this node we know has an embedded YouTube piece in the body field. Is that going to look right in our new responsive design? I don't know. Put a tag on it, and then you can just look at those nodes manually. You can check for nodes that have tables in the body, because it might not be disastrous, but it's probably something that you want to know about. Put a tag on it, and then manually check. Over on the testing side, what I did was I had those known problematic source articles that had messy data. I knew that the source ID was whatever number that it was, and I don't expect it to have this migration term. I do expect it to have this other one. So one by one, I would find those problematic types of articles in the source data and write a test for each type. So really, what I'm doing here is replicating in code that step that any developer would do when writing a migration, which is probably have two windows open, one with the source data, one with the Drupal site. You expect that when you migrate that Pilsner term, the description shows up. So that's a manual check that everybody's doing when writing a migration. By putting it in a test, I make sure that I don't accidentally lose it later. Same thing with any type of data. In this example, I know that the image file in the source data has this name. It should have the same name after it gets migrated. So far, all the work I've done in this space has been entirely client-specific. The only thing that's made it back up to this module yet is this one test of the Migrate examples module. So I'm hoping that this presentation will kick off some conversation about like what's the right way to do this. I found a way to do it on a couple client projects that's I think helped, but to move this Sandbox module to a full contrib project, there's room for improvement. So I've been doing these tests in a very array PI sort of way, where I'm in my tests just building up giant arrays, and it gets the job done for a one-off project. But to move to contrib, this probably needs a little more thought. So I'm hoping if anybody in this room has thoughts, either talk to me at the end of the presentation, talk to me after. There's probably a better way to structure these kinds of tests. So did the entire migration work? I think that's a separate question. In my usage of these tests so far, I'm using them to know I have one problem type of articles that have tables in their body fields. So I'll write a test for just that type. I have not yet found a way to answer, did the entire migration work the way I expected? Maybe this Simpletest amalgamation could answer that question. If it can, I don't know how yet. So patch is welcome is what I'm saying.
So essentially what you talked about is data cleanliness, data validity checks.
Yes.
Is there, and one of the ways you were doing that was that you created a method during migration in order to catch problems with the import.
Yes.
Is it possible to move that check to the test? Create some kind of method within the code that Simpletest runs
Yes.
that says, given the row of data you're giving me, how do I check it to see if it's accurate?
Yes. So one approach I considered was, for that example of we don't want direct YouTube embeds in the video, or I'm sorry, direct YouTube embeds in the body. The way I'm testing that now is to check in migration, like you were saying, put a tag and then look for the tag. I could just as easily have the test query the real database and see, are there any nodes that have YouTube embeds in the body? So yeah, that concept could run totally independent of migration, and you could run that test all the time and catch editors who are putting things in the body that you don't want them to.
Theoretically, if it's capable of running from the command line,
Mm-hmm.
you could have some kind of continuous integration.
Yeah.
Where just about every time you
Mm-hmm. If your editorial organization had a big fight about whether or not to use one space or two after periods, and you came to a decision, you could write a test to check all your body fields for 2 spaces after a period or 1 space. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think somebody else had a question. But the other question I had was, you were doing tests by testing a single piece of data.
Yes.
You found a place where you know there's a problem,
Mm-hmm.
but really the strength is to be able to iterate over a group of possible rows,
Mm-hmm.
theoretically all rows.
Yes.
So, is
So-
that just so astronomically resource intensive that you don't want to even try to do that?
One of the reasons I did it this way is because I thought that if I tried to write test code that tried to handle everything for some definition of everything, it would start to look too much like the migration code, and I was uncertain if I would actually catch problems. I don't know if I answered your question there, though.
I think that was a good one.
All right.
My only question was, so there's no way to automate the writing of the tests from what your data is. So
Yeah, I guess not.
so that would be testing all your data, like making sure that the migration was what you expected if you don't know what it is to begin with.
Right.
It's,
Yeah, this is, I'm writing the field mapping for the description field. I know that this one term has this one specific description, so I'll write a test for that.
what you-
And this is right for code generation.
I suppose.
And then
Yeah.
Just give it the input ID in source cable and output cable.
I like that.
And sets it up.
Yeah. And that might make it easier to avoid the array PI that I was showing.
Actually, because you have a mapping table anyways in Migrate, you won't need the input. So you just give it one input so that
Yeah.
nothing.
It could know these are all of your mappings. Here's a blank test. Give me known source keys and source values. That's a great idea. Do it in Twig?
Yeah.
You could? Yeah. Yeah.
That was future proof.
Great. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you, everybody.